what is your take on Israel? What about the occupied territories? Both sides seem to be the aggressor. People that matter and not these classified groups. Iraj, for me, is probably the only source to which I would go at the moment.
Welcome to this special report of Through the Liberty Lens with Leon Louw. I'm your host, Tom London. Seated opposite me is the man himself. Leon, welcome back to the studio.
Great to be with you as always, Tom.
It's an exciting show today because I've got a feeling I'm going to learn, and the people who are watching, you, will learn something today as well, because our guest is Iraj Abedian, who is a former professor of economics at UCT, former chief economist at Standard Bank, and founder and chief executive of Pan-Africa Capital Holdings and Pan-African Investment and Research Services. It's quite a title, Leon. And Iraj, welcome to the show. It's good to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome opportunity, and thank you for Leon to be here today.
Leon, you said there's only one person we can talk to when it comes to the current crisis we see in Iran and the region, and that is Iraj. Why?
Well, I follow it very closely, and I follow all sorts of people, and the closest I get to kind of thinking I'm learning something, I suppose, is Al Jazeera. Everything else is some kind of echo chamber, some kind of biased approach. I'm just astonished that you can't get objective analysis that I know where to get on what's going on in the Middle East, Israel, Lebanon, Iran, and so on, Gaza. And Iraj is probably the only one I listen to, and I think that makes sense, and I think he's objective. And he is, by the way, Iranian, and he is, in my view, a great source of information on the Middle East and Iran. But more than that, he's a fabulous source of information on South Africa and the South African economy and where South Africa fits in. And so maybe we'll touch on that. But Iraj, for me, is probably the only source to which I would go at the moment. I can't think of any major network, any other source than Iraj. And, you know, I, for example, want to ask Iraj what he makes of Netanyahu and what he makes of Hezbollah and so on. This is all stuff that Iraj is well informed on and, let's say, sensible on.
Well, everybody in the world seems to know everything about Iran at the moment, except everybody in the world knows very little beyond the headlines that we view on television and read in the newspapers. For example, the history of Iran. Let's go back 100 years. Most people would have no idea what happened in Iran 100 years ago or in the 50s, or the involvement of the West, the Americans, the French, for example, in the affairs of Iran. And so I'd like to give this topic some depth today, and I'm incredibly excited to have Iraj on board. Can we go back? Let's start with your history, Iraj. You spent, is it your first 20 years of your life in Iran, and you were born there?
Yeah, thank you very much. The first 22 years of my life, I was in Iran, born there, studied, had my first university degrees at University of Tehran, finished in 1977, and then that was the beginning of the rumbling of what culminated in 1979, the toppling of the Shah, which really was engineered from 1977. When Jimmy Carter came to have a Christmas dinner with the Shah.
Yeah.
And then the other three Western powers, UK, Germany, and France, finally in 1978 decided that they're going to topple the Shah and replace his regime or his kingdom with what now become the Ayatollah's regime. And that's where I've been involved ever since as a student, first in 1976, 77, 78, and subsequently when I moved to South Africa as a student in 1980 to the University of Cape Town. I've been following it very closely.
Take us back 100-odd years to the 1920s and the Pahlavi dynasty, and would it be the rise of nationalism around that time?
Absolutely. I mean, it's quite coincidentally late 1910s, early 1920s, where the rise, a nationwide rise of nationalism by a group mostly studied in Europe, mostly revolving around the time that our major neighbor, Turkey, was going through a secularization through President Ataturk, and Iranians felt that they too had to emerge from the age of sort of feudalism and religious domination to a secular industrialization and secularization age. And that was driven primarily through nationalism and revolved around two issues. One was the discovery of oil in the Middle East, including Iran. And secondly, believe it or not, on a very simple issue of how do we get the fiscus running along the modern lines, and the introduction of tariffs at border posts for imports and for export as a revenue source. The Europeans were centrally involved. The Belgian, the French primarily were the dominant force. But of course, UK was, through British Petroleum, had dominance in the Middle East, especially the Arab countries. And they too had realized that Iran also had oil. So British Petroleum had secured some kind of concession in the southern part of Iran. And the nationalists were very concerned that this was going to become the thin end of a new colonialism. Bearing in mind, James, that Iran had a history of never being colonized, being attacked, yes, being even ruled by invaders from Mughals to others, and yet never colonized. So the idea that the British Petroleum would become the source of colonization gave rise to a national movement that in 1920s culminated in a kind of coup d'etat coinciding with the post-World War, and they brought the new kingdom, the Pahlavis, into power.
Let's fast forward to the 1950s, 1953, and another major change in the country, backed by the United States.
That's right. CIA specifically staged a coup d'etat to bring the Pahlavi dynasty back against a very well-respected, very popular, very educated, Swiss-educated lawyer, Iranian, Dr. Mossadegh, who was very adamant that the Iranian oil should be nationalized and Iran should introduce a kind of constitutional monarchy, not an absolute monarchy. And of course, there was a very complex process. CIA was trying to push the Russians out of the country. At that time, the Russians, in kind of tacit support of the British and the French, were comfortably settled in the northwest part particularly, and Mossadegh was against it, but he was trying to resolve it through diplomacy. And the military force in Iran was not convinced that the British and the French were going to play honest with them. CIA used the opportunity to stage a coup d'etat and bring back the son of the Shah, whose father at that time was banished to Johannesburg.
Wow.
As part of a settlement, coincidentally. So General Fraser, who was a British general in South Africa, was assigned to take care of the royal family, and the CIA brought his son back. The father stayed in Johannesburg and died in Johannesburg. And the major coup d'etat, which left a scar on the modern Iranian history, was staged by CIA in 1953.
Where do we see the rise of the Ayatollah?
The Ayatollah, 1960s, Iran, from the CIA coup d'etat, the Shah embarked on a very, very determined, nationalistic, brand-making, raising, invoking the kingdom of Cyrus the Great and the kings of the past as the champions of human rights, as the champions of unity amongst diverse groups, as they called it, unity in diversity, acceptance of different population groups. Iran is made of about 11 to 12 to, depending how you define it, up to 14 tribal heritage, and with different cultures, different music, different language sometimes. But the Shah invoked that historic empire and the human rights, Charter of Human Rights, to do away with two things. One was the power of the clergy, and secondly, the need, the imperative of industrialization, diversification of economic sources, and very importantly, education. So he made education in 1960s. He introduced a 12-point, what he called it, the White Revolution. That White Revolution essentially got rid of the feudals in the country, the landowners who had maintained a very prehistoric control of the land with the support of the ayatollahs, the mullahs. The mullahs themselves have got a 500-year history, which we can at least note, but then we can move on. In 1960s, suddenly the clerical group who had full control of the feudal rich landowners who were taking care of them, keeping people under control from a religious point of view, as I call it, keeping the control of the people's mind and heart, whilst the landlords were exploiting them, literally. The Shah said, no, this land ownership is archaic. We need to modernize it, and we need to make sure that the land ownership is more equally distributed and people can be empowered. At the same time, he introduced compulsory education, free health, a whole host of modernization, secularization, touching on agriculture, touching on new industries, new communication. Radio stations were introduced, TV station was introduced, and oil became one of the sources of income. And even with regard to the oil industry, the Shah was very adamant that oil is limited, is a resource that will one day disappear. So we need to use the resources or the revenue from oil to make alternative sources of revenue. Ultimately, in early 1970s, it led to the formation of OPEC. But back in the middle of 1960s, one group of ayatollahs who came out furious against the Shah and his White Revolution was Khomeini. Khomeini led a group of super radical opposing his White Revolutions, ultimately culminated in him being banished to Iraq. And so it was a sort of fire brewing under the ash from 1960s until late 1970s. Late 1970s, by 1976, 77, when the decision of Jimmy Carter was to basically rattle the Shah's regime because it regarded it as too weak to withstand the USSR onrush or invasion of the Middle East. By that time, USSR had gone to Afghanistan, was in control of Afghanistan, and the next stop naturally would have been, in Carter's view, Iran. And if that happened, then the whole of Middle East would have gone. So what did they do? They brought Ayatollah from Iraq to Paris, and suddenly he shot into fame. Radio station, TV station, newspapers gave him the platform that he wanted, with obviously support of the UK, particularly, and the United States from a military point of view. So he shot to fame, and he maintained his anti-Shah, anti-White Revolution, anti-modernization, anti-colonization, anti-secularization, anti-Western civilization. And he promoted and propagated with his network of clergies from the villages to metropoles the notion that we need to create an Islamic civilization to rival the secular imperialistic Western civilization, as well as to fight the Eastern godless communist civilization. So that was his platform, and he shot to fame. In 1979, the French flew him to Iran with the support of America, UK, and Germany.
And so, as you say, this happened with the support of the United States and its allies. The same people who took him out recently were the people who installed him.
Absolutely. I keep saying that this is a typical case of Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
You create it, and within less than 9 months, the same group that Jimmy Carter and the West brought in, they attacked the American embassy. They took American hostages. Death to America became a national slogan up to today. Yes, it was a very interesting, tragic, but interesting episode in modern history of Iran, and in fact the modern history of the world.
It's a simplistic question, I suppose, but is that the point where things started to go wrong?
Absolutely. It went wrong, and it went from bad to worse. When Carter tried to rescue American hostages, there was a plane crash that was disastrous. It became very quickly a regional issue, and Khomeini decided that he wants to not only control Iran, and remember that the religious view, not political, religious view of Khomeini and his followers up to today is that they have a mission in the Islamic world to unite a Shia-led, as they define it. And I emphasize, it's not a generic Shia interpretation. It's a particular branch of Shias. There are about 70 odd groups in the Shia segment of Islamic world. And the version that Khomeini promoted and Khamenei institutionalized in Iran and its constitution is a particular interpretation of Islam, which says they have a God-given mission and they will have all the blessings that God can confer upon them to establish a world civilization for not any particular nation, but for the Islamic community. They call it Ummah. So Ayatollah doesn't see himself as the head of religious group in Iran or any Shia, any Muslim, whether it's in Indonesia, Mexico, or West Africa, belongs to that particular civilization, and he is the leader on behalf of God to decree and to issue fatwa, and then use the resources that come their way, such as the wealth of Iranian land and nation, is to be used for that purpose. It's a purpose that is divine. It's a purpose that has to continue against all forces as to be predicted and to be expected. So since then, from 1970s, 79 particularly, then he tried to export his version of Islam to Iraq, which was the natural neighbor, because the majority of Iraqi population was Shia, and yet Saddam Hussein and his Ba'ath regime was Sunnis. In terms of Khamenei's understanding, the Sunnis were abusing the Shia majority. That was not fair, and he had the responsibility as the leader of this particular community of Muslims to stand up to Saddam Hussein. So within less than 2 years of Khomeini coming to power, in 1982, a war broke out between Iran and Saddam Hussein of Iraq. Yeah. It took 8 years and more than 500,000 casualties and billions of damage to both nations before that war came to kind of a peace settlement by the United Nations.
I've got many more questions, including what the population of Iran feels about the history of the country and where they sit ideologically. But Leon has been sitting very quietly for the last 10 minutes or so and writing down a list of questions. So I'm going to ask Leon to take over for a question or two.
Thanks for that, Iraj. I want to bring in the issue that's going on now, which is Israel mainly, but also the US, and what's going on there. Why is Israel at loggerheads with Iran? Has Iran been supporting the way they allege all various enemies of Israel that attack it regularly, supposedly? And what is your take on Israel? Now, before you answer that, the way I see it is there are 4 very distinct issues here. One is, should there be an Israel, in other words, a Jewish nation state? That's what I call pure Zionism to be. That is whether there should be a Jewish nation state somewhere on earth That's question one. Question two is, if there is going to be one, should it be Israel, the country declared by the UN and others to be a country? And there are, of course, nation states are normal in the world. Italy for the Italians, France for the French, etc. So why not one for Jews? And then the third position is, what about the occupied territories? Are they really legitimately part or not part of Israel? And then thirdly, the behavior of the government. In other words, Netanyahu. So it seems to me you can be of those four, you can be in favor of 3, 2, 1. Any permutation is credible. But in the end, I'd just like to hear your chat, your discussion about where Israel fits in and why the war and to what extent it is or isn't legitimate, and why Israel seems to be wanting, according to some, scupper it by keeping to attack Hezbollah. And, of course, that might be fatal to the peace. And all of us, I guess all decent people, are hoping that there is a peace and the peace will last. And is Israel against that? Or would Israel also like peace? I just like your take on where Israel fits in.
Yeah, I think, Leon, that goes to the heart of this religious, if you like, apocalyptic belief on both sides of the ocean, or both of the equation, on the Ayatollah side and on the Zionist side. The Zionists, in terms of their belief, they have a God-given responsibility to their land, to the land of Zion, which nowadays is called Israel, or as they define it. Of course, they themselves have got divergences of how do you put the boundaries? Does it include the occupied territories? Does it include even Syria? Does it include part of Jordan? And so it goes. So there is a religious, absolutely fundamentalist belief as to where the location of that land of Israelites, Zionist control should be. At the same time, the Ayatollahs have got their own claim that, look, that land where the holiest mosque of Islam lies in Jerusalem, that is their God-given right. They believe that their prophet rose to the heaven from that holy point. That's for them is a extremely sacred piece of land that should not be governed by anybody other than the Muslims. Of course, amongst themselves, which group of Muslims, that's a separate story. But so you have on that front two competing, both extremely religious and belief-based. Both of them claim to the land. So that's where it started. Back in 1979, when Khomeini came in or was brought in, in less than 12 months, he put a stopwatch in the middle of one of the squares in Tehran about the date at which Israel should be wiped off the map. Literally, it should not exist anywhere in the Middle East. The least of them is where the holiest mosque of the Islamic nation lies in Jerusalem. So ever since, it's been an existential strategic objective of the regime to unite the global Muslim community by pushing out Israel, believing that the Sunni Muslims and all other Muslims did not really stand up to Israel. Of course, people are mindful that President Nasser had tried in 1960s, others had tried all kinds of anti-Israeli war and failed. So Khomeini said, no, that's not good enough. We cannot give up, and we should not cave into the Western pressure as Egypt did, as Jordan did, as Saudi Arabia did, etc., etc. So it began to accuse the entire Middle East and Arab nations or Islamic Arab nations of being puppets of the West, particularly America, as a new imperialist Western power. So the elimination of the state of Israel from where it is in the Middle East, which in terms of the Ayatollah's definition is an Islamic land. No Jews, no Christian, no other controlled agency or state has the right to exist. And that began back in 1979, 1980, a very non-accommodative binary geopolitical objective for the regime. The Israelis knew that sooner or later, this regime of Iran, when it establishes itself, will eliminate the state of Israel, by which means is a matter of time and a matter of observation. Of course, very soon, the Iranian regime began the formation of what is called the ring of resistance, meaning encircle the state of Israel from Iraq to Syria, to Lebanon, to segments of occupied territories. Earlier on, as you would know, the Palestinian areas of Israel were mostly under the control of either Jordan or Egypt, partly with the support of Syria. But as decades went by and the Palestinian Authority got split and became more and more radical and more fragmented, the regime in Iran found what is now called Hamas. Hamas was, as you know, the culmination of many fragmentations in amongst the Palestinian states, Palestinian nations. So eventually they created a foothold via their very strong position in Syria. Iran spent billions and billions of dollars and tens of thousands of troops to consolidate the control of the Syrian government, which was done by the Shia minority, the Alawi. So whereas the majority of population of Syria was not Shia, the 20 or 25% who were, they were in control through the Bashir Assad family. So Iran then created a ring of resistance around the state of Israel. The strongest was Syria, followed by Hezbollah in Lebanon, followed by its faction, which is now Hamas amongst the Palestinian nations, in Gaza particularly. And of course, they had their foothold in Iraq. So they thought we slowly but surely finding a growing power base in the region surrounding Israel. When the right time comes, when we are all ready, we will push the nation into the ocean or wipe them off the face of the earth. And that's the religious apocalyptic mission that they took upon themselves. The strongest of these, of course, was done in Lebanon for obvious reasons. The majority are Shias. They're funded by the regime, armed by the regime, trained by the regime. And there is historic links between the Ayatollahs, the clerical group of Iran, and the Lebanon, which I've written about separately, and others have written. But so that when George Bush, the son, was invading Iraq or did invade Iraq, this ring of resistance was well established, and he called that the axis of evil. Now, this is one man's terrorist, is other one's freedom fighter. Became a very a fact of Middle East power struggles. One funded, armed, and trained by the regime in Iran. The strongest, as I mentioned, was Syria, but Syria collapsed last year. Then became the Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is the closest to Israel. Well armed, and is the arch enemy of the Israeli state. So I hope that kind of provides a picture on your first question. Should the state of Israel exist, no matter what, who, and what kind of analytics we put in it historically, the reality is that the Zionists believe that they have a God-given right and mandate to protect that piece of land. At the same time, with the same zeal, the same fanaticism, the Ayatollahs in Iran, they believe that they have a God-given mission to use Iran and the region to fight that enemy. So you have two enemies who are really religious, fanatic, and hell-bent to eliminate, and one of them has to survive. The notion of coexistence for the Ayatollahs is not conceivable. It is sacrilegious for them. Whereas the Zionists can accept coexistence for as long as there is no claim on their piece of land. And that is where the situation sits.
Okay, thanks for that. Both sides seem to be the aggressor, and almost everybody is in one corner, one side. It's a binary analysis, instead of actually being able to look at the thing in some kind of balanced way. Now, who at the moment in the current war, this is really where we have to get, who at the moment is the real aggressor, who's guilty, who's innocent, or is it just simply this inevitable apocalyptic consequence that you raise of the religious beliefs of the two sides, which are irreconcilable? So if one is not to choose sides, but just try and understand, what is the way to understand what's going on?
See, Leon, that's a very, very really penetrating question. And I've listened and I've read many analyses of this. To answer your question, you need to look at the cause and effect type of analysis. If you look at a particular episode, for example, if you come from the Mars and land and tomorrow read the papers and you saw what Netanyahu is doing to Gaza people or to Hezbollah in Lebanon, you'll say, wow, this guy is mad and brutal and crazy. And some of his things are insane by a newcomer to the picture. Is he being ruthless by what he's doing? Yes. Did he start this thing? Then you have to go back to the root cause of it. Where did Hezbollah come in Lebanon? Who armed them? Who trained them? Who gave them the missiles? Why did they give them? What was the issue between Lebanese and Israelis that was so irreconcilable that attack had to happen? Now, if you go to the primal cause, as I tried to mention, it goes back to 79 that the regime decided to arm and to create this ring of resistance. And the Israelis have been watching every move of this regime literally minute by minute. So people have different views. They say the one who started this ring of resistance is the primary cause of all this havoc. Then if you become more recently, the attack by Hamas on Israel and the killing of over 1,000 people, the way they did it, it was engineered and ordered by Ayatollah Khamenei in Tehran. Now, that was the beginning of the modern confrontation, modern meaning the past 3 years. Who caused it? Well, if you're pro-Israel, you say, well, Hamas did this, Khamenei started it. We're just defending ourselves. If you're on the part of Hamas, you say, but back in 1944, when the state of Israel was drawn up by the British and the support of Americans, they didn't give us a land for the Palestinians, and ever since we've been homeless and dependent. So you go to that type of debate. So it's very difficult to not understand. It doesn't mean that I approve, and not understand Netanyahu and his wing of Israeli activists who say, if we blink, we will be wiped off. At the same time, I have every sympathy for the Palestinians who've been, much like the people of Iran, been traumatized and brutalized because some politicians back in 1944 and thereabout decided this is where the state of Israel should be, and they gave a commitment to its survival at the United Nations. And ever since, they've been bombing the hell out of that region and causing humanitarian crisis of massive proportions. So I think these are some of the complex issues of who was the primal cause and who was the secondary, tertiary, and incidental cause of the humanitarian crisis that we face in the Middle East today.
Right. Thanks for that. Now, what do you think might be a solution? In other words, if you were called in to play the role Pakistan is trying to play, and they said to you, look, Iraj, what now? What do you recommend should be done? Do you have any? I presume you do. I presume you have a view on what the future should be, and then you can talk about the extent to which that might be achieved.
Look, Julian, if you want I'm a believer in human rights, in humans' agency and people's choices. If I had the luxury, if I could play God for a couple of hours, I would say, guys, you mustn't talk about people over their heads. Don't assume leadership. Don't assume that you're talking for people. Let's put a referendum and see these 200 million people, how they want to live. My own experience in Iran, and this in a way comes to question that James raised, 90 million people, if you give them an opportunity to express themselves, I can, without fear of contradiction, say if they had no fear, 90% of them would say, we don't want this regime. We want a secular regime that is based on the divergence of people's beliefs, and secular religion has got a role, but anti-religion also has got a role, and people got to be entitled to their views. And we have lived for 2,500 years with diversity and have maintained our unity. We want to keep that. If you go to Saudi Arabia and ask people what do you want, they want to take care of a peaceful environment. They want to prosper, and they want to have their beliefs exercised, but not to be radicalized. And my prosperity depends on the elimination of annihilation. And I would like to believe that even the Jews in Israel, if they had this option, the majority of them would want to coexist in a peaceful manner with the Palestinians, and the Palestinians with the Israelis. But it's got to be a fair distribution of resources, from water to land to other opportunities. So I think what the situation in the Middle East is, and definitely in Iran, when I have a lot more contact with more diverse people, is that they don't see this regime as they're representing their views, but they have usurped power, and they have suppressed the agency of the majority of people. Middle East is not going to be resolved through military power. Middle East issues are humanitarian issues, human rights issues, and we need to resolve them. And this would be, Leon, my starting point, to say what's happening in Iran is not, I understand where it comes from, but the resolution of it cannot be done based on the same kind of hypothesis, military or ideology or confrontation. It has to be based on people's rights and views. And if we go that route, we can solve the problem a lot quicker than through military and ideology, simply because that piece of earth called Middle East must be and is one of the richest pieces of land on the globe, on the entire planet. And it can accommodate the prosperity of all without confrontation and without destruction of value and resources.
It's appropriate, Iraj, that everything you've said is consistent with the purpose of our work, which is the liberty lens. Here we are. You want freedom for the people to decide, and unfortunately their leaders are not good at allowing that. Would Israel be returned then, in your fantasy solution, to its original boundaries, the United Nations boundaries? In other words, give up the occupied territories. Would that be a requirement or appropriate?
I think that, in my view, not only appropriate, would not be even sufficient for the Palestinians. We need to rethink the peaceful coexistence of not just the Israelis, which they deserve peace and prosperity. At the same time, on the same basis, the Palestinians, and quite frankly, the population of Jordan, who spend a lot of their resources protecting themselves against internal and external pressures. We need to, in the same sort of paradigm of thinking, we need to think of the people of Syria, who have suffered massively over the past almost 90 years. So I think, in my vision of human-centric, the democratic paradigm, all these issues could be resolved a lot more sustainably for the benefit of all. And there is no shortage of resources or land or opportunities if we go to that paradigm. But if we want to maintain the old paradigm and impose missiles and radars and all that technology on top of it, we destroy human agency. We entrench some self-appointed spokesperson for the majority of people, and the result will be nothing but destruction and consolidation of historic and failed paradigms of thinking and philosophy and ideology.
Iraj, you touched on something, and I'd like to explore it just a little more, and that is that it's your assertion that the majority of the population of Iran are not in favor or do not support the ideology of their leaders. And there's proof of this. There have been popular uprisings. I'm thinking of the Green Movement, for example. But Iranians have been paying the price for some time on a humanitarian level. What has the population of Iran been through?
Well, they've been through the 3 generations of wasted opportunities, completely wasted and traumatized. Put it more crudely, they've been living in hell. And that's why the younger generation, more recently since 2021, 22, they have developed this paradigm of thinking, this mode of operating, that our parents were kept alive but denied living, which is very profound. This is my generation and generation after me, who was forced to accept this particular Islamic interpretation, imposed on them by the Western powers, brought in by a very archaic religious mentality. So I also don't want to deny the fact that although the 4 Western powers brought in, there was a power base inside that made the thing possible. But since then, that power base, James, in 1979, when the one and only referendum was held in Iran, it was told that 80% of population supported the establishment of Islamic Republic. But nobody defined what it was. There was no constitution. There was no principle. There was a binary choice. Do you want the Shah or do you want the Islamic Revolution, Islamic Republic, but not knowing what it contained? But be as it may, since then, and I'm answering your question, what this level of support, let's say it was 80%, give them the benefit of doubt, 80%, but in the last election that the regime held, and since then they have not allowed a referendum, they do not allow any peaceful march, and by their own admission, this is official statistics, you can check on their level of participation. The last participation in the election was 22%, of which the one who, and remember, there's only one party state. You can be on the, what they call it, reformist wing, or on the principalist, or if you like, conservative orthodox wing of it. The one that came to power had 10 point something, call it 11% support. Now, and that was with the blessing of the now dead Ayatollah. By official statement. But you can go one other indicator. If a nation, if the Republic, Islamic Republic, was really so convinced that more than 50% of people were behind it, they would have no fear of referendum. they would have no fear of international observers. They would have no fear of people coming to the streets and claiming their rights, because their rights is not supported by more than 50% of the population. So since 1979, indicators suggest that every 3 years on average, sometimes 2 years, sometimes 5 years, there has been uprising on some or other ground to express their dislike and their rejection of this regime. 2021, 2022, it reached its climax, where the women, after Mahsa Amini was killed, there was a popular uprising in the country, right across of the nation, to reject that. And the notion was, we want life, we want freedom, we want women liberalization of their rights. The most recent uprising happened in January this year, where millions of people came. So I think whatever indicator you look at, whether you look at the level of participation in elections declining steadily, the more frequent uprising of people against their standard of living, or the most recent one where a so-called governing regime switches off the global connectivity, which we still cannot talk to anybody or connect with anybody in Iran, massacres these people, whether according to the UN Human Rights Council, whether it's 30,000, 50,000, nobody knows, because nobody has got the statistics. Government itself says about 3,500 individuals. But hell, if you kill 3,500 people in 48 hours, there is something wrong. It cannot be indicator of your populist and democratic support. So I think that's the level of support. These are the indicators. And Leon mentioned that Al Jazeera has got the closest to the truth situation. I refer you to an article on the website of Al Jazeera where the number 22%, which I refer to, comes from. So it's not my number or my guesstimate.
Iraj, just I guess my last big question to you, and this might be simplistic or difficult to answer. Is anyone guilty of genocide or ethnic cleansing? Obviously, Netanyahu and Israel are accused of that, and many in South Africa believe that to be true. But what about anyone else? Is Iran, Hezbollah, are they guilty of genocide or ethnic cleansing? So the use of these terms, genocide and ethnic cleansing, intrigue me because they're not consistent with what I've always understood the English language to mean on these terms, but just speak to those questions, ethnic cleansing and genocide, by any of the role players.
Look, in my understanding of history since 1979 in Iran, the case of ethnic cleansing has been against the Kurds on the western part of the country, bordering Iraq and Turkey. It already began in 1979, 1980, where a particular population group were massacred. I do not know the legal language of the definition of how many people do you have to kill before it becomes ethnic cleansing. Is it 10,000? Is it 5,000? Is it 50,000? So I would like to suggest that this notion of ethnic cleansing, and this is from a human-centric point of view, we need to redefine the term. It's not about whether a particular ethnicity, tribal or racial grouping are targeted. It has to be human beings who may be made of Turks and Kurds and Arabs and everybody else. But if a particular regime, particularly a governing regime, wipes out 30,000 people and 200,000 are imprisoned, and in prison they are hanged in public daily, as is the case in Iran now. For me, doesn't matter whether you call it ethnic cleansing or not. It is a widespread cleansing of a group of human beings that are captured by the boundaries of the state with the force of the gun, cut off from the global communication, and being systematically killed. To me, that's my definition of ethnic cleansing. I'm not looking for a particular white or black or tribal affiliation. I'm looking for the number of human beings who want to live. They want to express their agency. And yet the governing regime wipes them out without engaging them, without a court, without any process other than a bullet in their head. We've had cases where thousands have been pulled out of hospitals. That's against any law that we know, even warlords. To me, that's we need to. I'm suggesting, Leon, that we need to push the boundaries, modernize these notions that once upon a time were only confined to a particular population group. That, for example, Hitler wanted to wipe out the Jews, or Netanyahu wanted to wipe out the Palestinians, or we had it in Bosnia, we had it in the southern Sudan, we had it in DRC, and so on and so forth.
Rwanda, of course.
And as we speak, it's happening. So I think we need to redefine this thing. We need to bring human beings, their rights and their agency into the center of international law, and then have a different conversation. If we go there and redefine it, yes, in Iran there has been ethnic cleansing by mass killing by no other than the governing regime.
Yeah, thanks. So that's how I understand it, as being for individual rights, people that matter, and not these classified groups. What I understand you to have hinted at along the way is that maybe Israel or Netanyahu has been guilty too of, let's say, genocide as accused, but maybe not on the, it's again, you quite correctly, in my view, I'm absolutely of the view that it's a case of numbers. How many? A lot of people means ethnic cleansing or genocide, regardless of how you classify them, and I agree with you on that. So just to speak very briefly about whether this is something that Israel has been guilty of as accused.
Yeah, Israel, by their own admission, they've killed in Gaza alone since October 2023 over 74,000 people during that period, which still continues. By the same token, Iran has killed 30 to 50,000 in 48 hours in January this year. So both of them, as far as I'm concerned, they are genocidal evidence. And as we speak, there are 220,000 Iranian detained without trace since January. And the government or the regime refuses to even tell their families where they are and so on. So I think the order of magnitude deserves attention. If these numbers are exaggerated, it's very easy to sort it out. A United Nations or some independent group should be allowed into the country to talk to the families and to trace down their ID numbers, their pictures, and so on and so forth, and resolve the issues the same way that in other areas of the globe we have done. Yes, if the numbers matter, Netanyahu and Israel have done it in Gaza and in Palestine over time, and Iran has done it in Iran. And of course, not to forget what happened in Syria. In Syria, 750,000 people were wiped out by this Iranian regime and the Assad regime. And 7 million people were pushed out of their habitat. They moved to Europe and Turkey and so on and so forth. That too needs to be brought into the picture. So if we are not careful, Leon, and this is my fear, that if Americans and other forces underestimate what's happening in the Middle East today, we're going to see the numbers of the order of magnitude that will make Gaza look like a walk in the park.
Iraj, economically, can Iran afford to take the position it's taken? Are they diverting funds to the military and way too much to military and arms to sustain the economy? What does Iran look like economically?
It's a basket case, literally, because literally all the resources for the past 30 years, not the first 10 years, I must admit, not the first 10 years, but since then, when the ring of resistance and the financing of it and the arming them and training them and development of missiles and drones and so on became the centerpiece of the survival of the regime. And when the populist support for it declined rapidly, the regime diverted almost 90% of resources of the country towards, call it, military industry. And the arming of the Lebanese and the arming of the Syrians and the arming of Hezbollah and the arming of the different proxies in Iraq and in Yemen and so on and so forth. So the economy, again, statistics are scarce, so let me qualify the number.
Sure.
They say between 80 to 90% of the economy, other than a small SMEs, small medium enterprises, corner cafes and so on, as far as the industry is concerned, is all under the control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, who has one mission only, to divert resources on the manufacturing and on the trade side and on the services towards the military establishment, not just for Iran, but for the whole region, to arm the ring of resistance, and because that's where apocalyptic vision and strategy is. So the economy has dwindled to the point that double-digit 40, 50, 60% inflation has been the order of the day, per capita income declining, value of the currency diminishing to close to zero. And that has been the main indicator of the lack of people's support. People have watched. In my lifetime, James, over 30 years, when I left Iran to come to South Africa, Dubai was a desert with a couple of lights on it. Today, Dubai is what Dubai has become. Saudi Arabia was a place that nobody wanted to go except for some religious sort of practices. Today, Saudi Arabia is rapidly. Kuwait and Bahrain have become per capita income one of the top 10 in the world. So Iranians are watching to say, hell, in 1979, Iran was 15% per capita higher than South Korea. Today, they don't feature. They are from the bottom, not from the top. So, the economy is in a disaster. The standard of living and per capita income declining, and the pressure on the living standards has been and remains literally hellish. No other way to explain it.
I've just got one question left, and then Leon will round off. This ceasefire that we've seen, or the so-called ceasefire the last few days, is it a ceasefire? Is it sustainable? What happens next?
If I look at the 10-point plan that the Iranian regime that President Trump has put out, these are two different manifestos, two different agenda for negotiations. So I'm bamboozled as to how one going north, one going south, they can meet in any way in the middle. So on the face of it, they may well be divergent tactics by both parties to put out something that their power base in America and in Iran kind of live with it, but they come out of it with a different, if you like, settlement. I highly, highly doubt that for two reasons. One is that the one that is underestimated is the state of Israel. They have, as I mentioned before, existential threat. They are not going to accept anything which is half-baked and dangerous. The second one, which is a new one, as a result of the past 40 days of bombardment and Iran bombarding not just Israel, but doing to UAE, to Kuwait, to all civilian infrastructure, you now have a different interest group in the Middle East, the Arab nations across the Gulf, Persian Gulf, and they too feel existentially threatened. Imagine if this regime comes to a settlement with America, but survives. The day that America goes, the ones who have to live with this regime is Saudi Arabia, UAE, and all the smaller Arab states. And they too become the major stakeholder, and I don't see them putting up with a settlement that makes the regime survive, and they will be on the receiving end of it happily ever after.
Iraj, that's somewhat pessimistic. As an economist, I suppose I have this question. Surely the seduction, the way to seduce all the parties into something that works, whatever that might be, and assuming that's conceivable, something that will work, is prosperity. They can all be extraordinarily prosperous and wealthy if they just stop fighting each other and they have some sort of settlement. In other words, maybe they can coalesce around some vision of universal prosperity for all, of the kind you now have in the Emirates, for example, and the kind you have in small pockets, Saudi Arabia. So this is probably too amorphous to be a serious question to Iraj, but I nonetheless want to know, prosperity surely is something that all of them must want, and can that not somehow be conjured and offered and generated?
Leon, it depends on one of the economics, principles of individuals' utility curve. Depends what is in your utility function. If your utility function is based on secular prosperity, as you just defined it, it's a no-brainer. Get together, cooperate, we'll all be happy, per capita income increase, better houses, better everything. But if your utility function is to be martyred on the path of this apocalyptic vision that you have, and money and sort of secular belongings or materialistic belongings are just instrument of your ultimate achievement, then you have a different kind of utility function. You have what they call the corner utility function. I draw your attention to a tweet or an X message that the foreign minister of Iran issued last week, while the war was still rumbling on. He sent a message to President Trump saying, the same way that you have your people wanting to prosper in millions, we have millions of people who are wishful of dying. They are prepared to die to achieve their objective. Now, these are two different utility functions. So I'm not hypothesizing. I'm referring to a written text of one of the remaining leaders in this regime. The point I'm making, Leon, is that you have I can see the rest of the Middle East at the moment, at least at the generality of people and government, subscribing to your paradigm that let's cooperate together will be better. And that is, at the end of the day, the essence of the so-called Abrahamic Accord that they want to propagate, and they've had some subscription to it, UAE, Saudi Arabia, etc., to some or other measure. The one that says that paradigm is problematic, that paradigm should be rejected with the contempt that it deserves, is the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people. I must emphasize, the Iranian people are on the same wave as you are, and in fact better. But the regime says this must be rejected with the contempt that it deserves, because it denies us the right to rule Jerusalem, to push Israel out, and to assert our domination on the Islamic world, not on just the Iranian and the Shias. Now, you must reconcile those two paradigms.
Sure. Iraj, you gave us an hour of your time, and we've taken up an hour of your time. My final question to you is what would your message be to South Africans who are observing this conflict and are taking positions on it? What would you say to South African viewers who are watching this program?
I would have a 3-point message. One is it is our responsibility to refocus the contending and warring parties to human rights issues, not focus them on military and or ideological fights. What happens to human beings in the process? Number one. Number two, check the facts of history. Do not oversimplify. Do not go by the headline and assume that you know all the details that you need to judge. And thirdly, South Africa, in my view, has a human-centric constitution, and has shown that if we go by the principle that Leon highlighted, prosperity of the collective, it has made it almost a showcase. It works. You can have very competing views, but you can, if you come around the table based on human rights, you can resolve the issues a lot easier and better. So as South African, my recommendation is we need to come out very squarely Doesn't matter whether Trump likes it or Netanyahu doesn't like it or Ayatollahs don't like it. We need to refocus the key issue on human rights issues. 90 million Iranians, 200 million Middle Eastern, and the global impact that it has if we allow this thing fester and expand and become more chronic. It's not just Iranians who will suffer. Up to now, they have been. From now on, if this issue is not resolved, and that's my final message to South Africans, no island on the planet will be spared the economic consequences of it through the implications through oil and other trade issues.
It's sad, isn't it, that the people who suffer are the people.
Exactly. Absolutely. Not the leaders. Yeah.
I'd like to thank you, really, Iraj Abedian. Thank you for joining us today. We really do appreciate your time on this special edition of Through the Liberty Lens. Leon, any last comments?
None, just thanks, Iraj. And as I knew you would be balanced and sensible and informed, and that's valuable, and everyone needs that. That's why everyone should watch this recording.
Thank you very much.
I've got a million more questions, but we don't have the time. Hopefully we'll join you again on a future program. But we'd just like to thank you for your time and your insights, Iraj Abedian. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you too.
And that was a special edition of Through the Liberty Lens with Leon Louw and myself, Tom London. Make sure to keep watching this channel. There'll be more programs coming your way.